So like I say, welcome to the Blended Netball webinar. It's great to have you. We're going to get started now, and like I say, we'll be with you in your company for about an hour or so. We're going to cover all sorts. We're going to start with some real basics and run through all the way to some more detail and how it interlinks with different leadership programs. But it's kind of worth saying that we were just blown away by the responses that we had from schools. When we initially were thinking about how many schools we wanted to get signed up, we would have been over the moon with 150 schools nationwide, especially as we don't really have a history of doing this kind of thing in netball. But we actually ended up with 599 schools and clubs registering. So we are just chuffed a bit. And I'm really excited for what the new school year and the new membership year brings come September for netball in general, but for Blended specifically. The kind of things we're going to talk about this morning is we'll do some introductions. I'll introduce myself a bit more formally, talk a little bit around who's been involved and their backgrounds, and then we'll jump onto Blended in brief to give an overview, to give you a flavour. But then we're going to look more broadly at some of the disability landscape, both nationally, in schools and in the education sector, and internally at England Netball, before we kind of finish on a much more detailed look at Blended Netball. And we're going to look at some of the resources and show you exactly what it looks like. So if in the introduction bit to the Blended in brief, you've got a question, we may well be covering it a little bit later. So that's the plan for this morning, and hopefully, like I say, we should be about 45 minutes, 50 minutes or so, and there'll be plenty of opportunities to ask questions. So my name's Rich Evans. I am strategic lead for disability. I'm a physio by trade. That's my background, and I've been with England Netball for, well, just short of 3 years. I joined in September 2017. And my roles previously have always been within disability. So when I trained to be a physio, I always wanted to work in disability. That's where my passion is. It's where I volunteered in the past, and it's where my career has taken me to. So I've worked for a couple of other governing bodies. Boccia England is one of the Paralympic governing bodies, and CP Sport is the governing body for people with cerebral palsy. So I've worked both in disability-specific areas and governing body sport-specific areas too. I tutor for Disability Sports Coach, UK Coaching, and Boccia England. And I guess this kind of shows the stuff that I've been, the stuff that I've done. What I'm not is I'm not a teacher. That's what I'm not. I'm not a trained teacher. My wife's a teacher, which is really useful to give some insight, especially around the current changes and logistics that are happening at the moment, to be able to understand the workload as well that teachers have on them. And the other thing is that I'm not a netballer. I came into the sport not knowing much about netball, but knowing quite a bit around disability. But over these 3 years, I've really kind of grown to love netball, I suppose, be the easiest way of explaining it. And I think that actually for disability, it is just one of a perfect sport, and we can see that it's growing so quickly in the disability sector already. So what I'm not is a teacher, and what I'm not is a netballer. So to be leading this Blended Netball, which is a netball program in schools, might seem a little bit bizarre. And am I the right person? And the answer is, well, no, not really, but don't worry. This has been developed by the right people. We've brought in netballers, we've brought in teachers, we've done pilots, we have done forums, we've done an expansive amount of research and development to get it to this stage. In fact, about 2 years worth of input that I've had in this, and you'll actually find out it started actually before even I came on board. But the real push for Blended Netball kind of started around 2 years ago. So yes, I'm here speaking to you today, not as a teacher and not as a netballer, but please know that the right people have been involved in the development of this. And I think this is going to be a live program. We don't want this to kind of launch on September 1st and then sit dormant for the next however many years. We want this to be something which is updated and continued and developed and expanded as we get more feedback coming in from you guys, the guys that are going to be delivering it in your local towns and schools. So Blended in brief, where did it come from? Well, actually, if you might remember, this time last year was the Netball World Cup, and part of the Netball World Cup, we joined together with hockey and with cricket for 3 female World Cups in 3 years, and it was called Team Up. You might have come across it if you are a netball diehard, but Team Up was this a PR program, really, where the 3 sports got together to promote the 3 female World Cups in 3 years. And Wembley Stadium Trust actually got in touch with us and said, what are you actually doing? What delivery are you doing? He said, well, actually, we're doing very little delivery. It's much more around collaboration and PR. And they said, we've got some money for you to do some delivery. And part of their focus was around disability. So this is kind of before I came in, and we started talking with them. And the initial idea really was that mainstream girls would go into special schools to deliver netball. And this was focused in London because that's where they're based. But it soon became clear that actually the logistics of children leaving school to go to another school to deliver netball and then coming out just wasn't really practical. It wasn't really going to work. But that idea of mainstream girls delivering to girls with special educational needs was kind of born from that. And that's kind of the background to it. So a lot of this development and the pilots have happened in London, not exclusively, but that is where a lot of it has been based so far. And now we're really excited to bring it wider to the whole country. So what is Blended Netball? Well, in essence, it is a peer-to-peer program that sees mainstream girls delivering the hard skills of netball to SEN girls, girls with special educational needs. But obviously, peer-to-peer suggests it's two-way, and really the way that those mainstream girls are also going to be developing is, well, they're going to be developing their communication skills, their leadership skills, their empathy skills, all of the kind of soft skills which bring people into good leadership, giving them opportunities to deliver and to grow as individuals. So really, this is absolutely a two-way program. Mainstream girls are passing on the hard skills of netball and receiving back a lot of soft skills. They're really developing their soft skills. And when I say peer-to-peer, I really do mean that in the sense of this isn't teacher-led or teacher-delivered. We'll talk about it in more detail later. But of course, there's going to be some teacher involvement and there'll need to be some oversight by teachers. But really, in essence, this is a very light touch program when it comes to teacher involvement. And that was kind of how it was planned from the start. So the way that the program works is that there's 6 resources which take people from introduction to the sport all the way through to competition, through attacking, shooting, passing, defending. And the idea really is to take individuals from that zero to hero idea. We found in our testing that, and research backs this up as well, the facts back it up, that actually SEN girls, they don't have the same access to PE as mainstream girls do. Now, your school might be different. Your school might give absolutely equal opportunity, which is fantastic. But the reality is most schools don't. Most schools have SEN girls doing PE or sport separately to mainstream girls, and often doing different sports. Like bocce, where I came from, that's a big sport in the Paralympic world, in the SEN world, whereas netball delivered to across all of the SEN girls is actually pretty rare and doesn't happen that often. So the idea really is to take people from zero knowledge all the way up to hero status on the court and competing. We did some of the pilots. It really became clear that actually SEN girls really didn't have a lot of the skills required to catch a ball two-handed that was a netball size, especially if it was kind of bouncing up to them or coming to them at any amount of pace. And it just really became clear that we have to go absolutely back to basics and start from scratch. And so the resources that you see in front of you, we're going to jump into the passing one, I think it is, later in more detail. But these resources are really designed for 14, 15-year-old mainstream girls to be able to pick up and deliver. So there's not going to be a lot of teacher blurb, there's not a lot of explanation. They should be really clear and recognizable to 14, 15-year-old mainstream girls who know netball to be able to deliver. And this whole project really kind of came about or developed in earnest after a conversation I had with my friend at England Netball, Carly. We talked when I came in, and I was really struggling with the idea of, if someone hasn't played netball at school, how would they ever get to know that netball was an option for them? You know, netball, we know it's grown in popularity and its public awareness has increased so much, especially over the last few years. But we don't dominate the back pages. We're not, you know, the headline on every single day on the BBC Sports app. And so if you didn't play it at school, how would you know that it was a sport available to them, to yourself? And that's really kind of where it came to, because if we want to build a foundation of disability within netball, we really need to start in the school sector. That's really where we need to start to give people the experience of netball, because we show you some figures later, but what we know is if you give people the opportunity, they will come and they will keep coming and they will really grow to love the sport. So that's it in brief. 6 resources, but there's enough content really to cover a whole term. It's quite content heavy, and we don't expect everyone to do a single resource in a single session. It's aimed at 14, 15-year-old mainstream girls to deliver with a very light touch approach from a teacher's point of view. So let's move now a little bit just to share a few kind of facts and figures with you. And you know, I've worked in the sector pretty much all of my career, and all of my career. And one of the areas which I had to develop coming in is a strategy, which I'll mention a little bit later on. And that was really important to looking at all the facts and figures around the country to give me a national perspective. And I'll share these with you. I'll share a few of them with you. And just take the time to look at them and kind of, does that surprise you? Are these numbers bigger or smaller than what you maybe thought coming into this call? So, disability in England. Well, there's about 50 million people in England. And as of the last census, which was 9 years ago, 2011, new one due next year, but as of 2011, there was 9.4 million people with a long-standing limiting disability or illness. 9.4 million. Well, I think it'd be safe to say these days we could round that up to 10 million. And in fact, the actual thing that we often talk about is 1 in 5. That's the number I'll often talk about. 1 in 5 people in England have a long-standing limiting disability or illness. That's a pretty staggering amount. When you think about maybe the circles that you are in socially and professionally, I'm pretty sure that you aren't seeing 1 in 5 people with a disability. But this next one was actually one of the things which really took me by surprise, was across that 9.4 million, or actually there's quite a big swing towards females. Generally, females are overrepresented when it comes to the disability population. Just short of 56% of all people with disabilities are female, and around 44% male. That's a 12% swing between males and females. And this kind of really caught me off guard. I guess naively, I thought that if there was going to be a swing, it'd probably be 2 males rather than 2 females. This is great news for netball, as we are predominantly a female-focused sport. But that was a really interesting stat that stood out to me quite significantly. One of the other things to note was kind of like the regional spread. It's easy to think of having a national approach, but actually, you know, we're all in towns and counties and regions, and there's actually a big difference across the country. So if you're in the northeast, you've got nearly 22% of the population have got a disability, whereas in London it's 14%. That is a significant difference. Yes, London is more densely populated, so there may well actually be more people with disabilities living in London, but as a proportion of the population, it's actually significantly lower than the northeast. As you'll probably guess from this graph, or from this image, that the trends kind of match household income. So the higher the household income, the lower the percentage of disability, and vice versa. So London and the southeast have the highest household income, and they've got the lowest percentages of people with disability. Look at the north, northwest, northeast, they've got lower income, household incomes, but have got a higher percentage of disability living in those regions. So just know, based on wherever you are in the country, that there could be quite a significant swing, both between males and females, but also region by region. Now, when we talk about disability, we often think of, a diagnosis or one thing. And often if there is a disability box that you have to tick, and maybe a drop-down menu for you to choose a disability or a space for you to write, there's often only space to write one thing. But I think it's really important to recognize that 75% of people with disabilities, 75% of that 9.4 million, actually have more than one impairment. They have more than one disability. And often we don't think about that. We think about having being disabled or being non-disabled. We don't necessarily think about, well, within disability, there's a 75% chance of having more than one impairment, and that's 2, 3, 4, 5 different impairments. In the strategy, I go into more detail, but there's quite a lot of overlap between impairments. Mobility is the highest, or has the highest level of people that have that disability, but that overlaps quite strongly with dexterity. So if someone has a problem with walking, maybe because of arthritis or something like that, there's a good overlap, there's a good chance that actually they may also have some fine motor dexterity issues. So finger work might be hard for them to be able to do, buttons or zips and those kind of things. So we often think of disability in quite binary terms, but actually all the research says that that is absolutely the wrong way to go about things. Because there is just a myriad of different disabilities that overlap each other. In fact, if we look here on the right hand side, you can see kind of a breakdown of female disability types, and this kind of speaks back a little bit to that male-female split. But you'll see that actually most of the areas of disability, there are more females on, whether that's visual all the way through to dexterity, mobility, and there's only a few areas which tend to swing or skew towards males. Autistic spectrum disorder, for example, skews towards males, but it's one of the few that do. And one of the biggest things, to give you some context around this, is that 50% of people with a disability say that they experience long-term pain. And actually, it's often the long-term pain or the pain that stops people from participating or stops people from returning to court. And that's just something to bear in mind, whether you're in a club or whether you're in a school. When you're doing SEN or disability sessions, just the way that you build in breaks into your sessions, and the way that you maybe lower the intensity a little bit, because even though they might not feel it immediately, there's actually a really good chance, or it's 50% chance, that they are also experiencing long-term pain, and it's going to affect them more than just the DOMS that we all feel, the delayed onset of muscle soreness that we all feel after a hard netball session or run or whatever our sport might be. So something around pacing of sessions can be in there for adaptation. The one thing with all of this is 9.4 million, I'm sure you have already picked up on this, is generally, we talked about the male-female skew and the regional skew, but it is worth saying that there is a skew towards older people. So more people with disabilities are older rather than younger. That's just worth pointing out. But from a school age point of view, 8% of the population that have a disability that are under 16. That works out at 800,000 people. So if we included colleges, so just to keep it for schools and colleges, under 18s, there's about 1 million people with disabilities that are 18 and under. notice I'm talking about disabilities, and then also earlier when I was talking more specifically around blended, I was talking about special educational needs. And the reason being is, I'm sure many of you will be aware, is that there is a slight difference between disability and special educational needs. Special educational needs is a broader term, but that is who this program speaks to. And actually, it's just short of 15%. 15% of all students have special educational needs in England. Well, there's 9 million students in state schools in England. That works out as 1.35 million pupils with special educational needs in state schools. 1.35 million SEN pupils in state schools. That's a staggering number, and one which we often overlook. And I wonder if you think about, if you reflect on your school, how many people at your school that you would know or recognize as having, or come into contact in your lessons with special educational needs. Again, your school may have completely equal access to PE, and that's fantastic, but that isn't the reality for most schools. And to bring that further into focus, what that actually equates to is 70 SEN girls per secondary state school. 70 SEN girls per secondary state school in England. Well, that's quite a staggering number, and is a lot higher. Certainly when we were doing our pilots and our forums with teachers, a lot of teachers could name quite a few, maybe even 20, but when I said actually there was 70, a lot of people didn't actually believe that to be true. And that's just the way that our system works. Over time, 10 years ago, a lot of people were in special schools and they've been integrated into mainstream schools, but often are in their own groups, cohorts within a school. So this isn't a challenge, and I'm not being accusational towards schools and education around this. It's just a fact that 70 SEN girls in an average state secondary school, and they're not getting access to PE in the same way as the mainstream girls. Notice I keep saying girls at this stage. It's worth pointing out that you could double that to include boys, 140 SEN children per school. And blended, at this point, it's worth saying, isn't exclusive to girls. Boys are welcome to take part in blended as well. I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail later, but I just wanted to highlight that at this point. This is a female-focused program. It's aimed at girls, but it is not exclusive to girls. So that's some figures nationally and in education. But what about in England netball? We aren't a traditional disability sport. And this graph here, it's an internal graph, isn't it, from an internal document. Just for reference, DDP there represents deaf and disabled person. This just kind of gives you an idea a little bit about our history, or maybe lack of history. The red columns there are our membership over the last however many years, and the blue columns, or numbers that you might be able to see, are the number of deaf and disabled people taking part in all of our programs. So not just membership, in all of our programs. And you will see there was just a massive discrepancy. You know, we talked about 1 in 5, didn't we? 1 in 5 people have got a disability or long-standing illness in England, and yet we're probably at, I don't know, 0.005% taking part in netball. Historically, football, wheelchair basketball have got 100 years on us from development. A lot of their disability football and wheelchair basketball kind of developed out of First World War, 1919, 1920, around that kind of era. Athletics has been doing disability for, you know, hundreds of years. And so it would not be a stretch to say that we are centuries behind other sports. Now, I don't see that as a negative. I think that what that gives us is a blank slate, a clean start to do things right, building on all of the work that other sports have done. And I'll share with you a little bit about that later on. But these figures, you know, you see to 2017, I came in September 2017, started to learn about the sport. And one of the areas that we really wanted to develop was around the understanding of disability within our own staff team. So we did a lot of staff training in that first 6 months. And the very next year, we started to see progress, but actually an awful lot more progress than we thought. The previous year, we were about 450. And then we tripled that within 1 year to, let's be positive, let's round that up to 1,400. We got around 1,400 deaf and disabled people playing netball within England Netball through our staff team. That was just incredible. And this last year has just kind of blown us out the water, to be honest. We were just short of 5,000 deaf and disabled women and girls playing netball within England Netball products and programs and membership and things. And I say this not to kind of blow my own trumpet, but more to say that netball, if we make it open and give people the opportunity, they come. They really, really do come. These numbers are basically people either in our membership growing or within stuff like walking netball and back to netball, the numbers of people with disability growing massively in what we already offer and have offered for the last 10 years plus. But with a little bit of a, open mindset, a little bit of training, people have come well in their thousands, which is incredible. In 2 years, we've gone from 448 to, increased by tenfold to just short of 5,000, which just shows the appetite for netball that is out there in the disability community. So the kind of things that we've done over these 2 years, you may well have seen if you follow us on Instagram and Facebook, if you follow us more closely. But we've written a strategy and we've launched a strategy. And this is quite a short strategy. It's a 3-year strategy. And the reason being is because we really need to set a foundation for the sport on which to grow. So I would really encourage you, especially if you're a club watching this, because this is mainly focused at schools, but isn't exclusive to schools. There's a lot here for clubs. There's a lot more in the strategy for clubs. So definitely check out the strategy. All of these details you can find out if you just type para netball into Google. We will be the top result. That'll take us to the para netball homepage, and you can find more information on these. But we launched a strategy. Be Netball is our primary school offer, which replace High Five if you've come across that. And one of the things I'm most proud about with Be Netball is just the absolute integration of disability and inclusion into it. It's not a tag on, it's not a module, it's not an afterthought. If you're involved in Be Netball and the resources, you will know that inclusion is built onto every single page that we've done. And that really speaks to the attitude of England Netball over these last 2 years, and I guess why I've stuck around, why I've grown in my love for the sport and the organisation, is because disability hasn't been a tick box exercise. It has been embraced, and you can see that reflected in the numbers. Interesting, the numbers that I mentioned before don't include Be Netball. So that's a really interesting thing. So they're going to be even higher than that too. Para Netball Championships, so we've brought in and modified our competition structure. Before, again, if you're a diehard, you may well have known about the Marion Smith competition, which has run for an awful long time. This builds on that. People are still competing for the Marion Smith trophy, but we've kind of updated it and brought it into kind of more of a modern state. So now at the championships, there's a club championships, there's a schools championships, and there's a deaf netball championships as well. And they run February time. I'll talk about that a little bit later, but they run annually. Schools competition is on a Friday, and then the clubs, which schools are also free to enter if you wanted to stay over and compete in 2 championships, but schools competition is on a Friday. The Saturday is the clubs and deaf netball championships. And what we've seen here is the numbers again have grown massively. In the Marion Smith, we had between 30 and 50 people playing, 3 to 5 teams. And this year, when we kind of opened up, we didn't really know how many we were going to get. And we ended up with over 200 athletes from 20 different clubs and teams, which is just a staggering response. And again, really speaks to people's love for the sport. Give them that experience, give them that opportunity, and they'll take it up. We've introduced Core Inclusive Club Network. We're wanting one of these inclusive clubs in every region. And this is a club which it doesn't have to do disability every single week. In fact, most of the clubs do a session once a month. But really, they're there to be a beacon in their region to other clubs, to maybe support other clubs if they do have one or two people with disabilities in there, and then maybe once a month come together for a training. We're looking to develop this. We haven't quite got national coverage at this stage, but we're hoping by the time we get to April, we'll have national coverage, and be able to say that we do have one club per region as a minimum. And so if you're a club watching this and you're really interested in kind of diversifying your sessions, then please do get in touch. Again, core inclusive clubs are on the Paranetball page. Just type in Paranetball into Google, it'll come up, and then if you click through to core inclusive clubs, you can find out more information, some of the benefits that you get from training, from a little bit of funding as well, through to kind of a conference which we run annually. We've also developed a disability awareness course, and that launched in I guess it launched in April, I think it was, and is available. It's a 4-hour course. It's open to anyone over the age of 16 to come on. It's a theory-based course, but it's not a lecture. It's very interactive, and it's really born out of the idea of what are people's barriers to delivery. So it's not a case of you're going to go away with a medical degree or anything when you come out of it. In fact, quite the opposite. Actually, the point of the course is to look at our barriers, our worries. And we know, for example, one of the biggest worries is saying the wrong thing or offending someone. And so what we tend to do is not say anything at all. So one of the things that we look at is the language of disability in a module we call Can I Say? And we literally spend time in a very frank, open, confidential room that we are able to use the language that comes naturally to us, so we can be educated and updated on our language, so we can take it out into the community. Wider education training too, we're looking as to how we can maybe bring disability into and inclusion into our level 1 and level 2 stuff. Also, if you follow the coaching channels, we've been running a series called Coach the Person over the last couple of years, where we've maybe done something a little bit more disability specific. So we've kind of looked at a wider education and training, and also we've started to develop disability specific or impairment specific competition rules game, for example, deaf netball. We are looking to develop in the future physical disabilities as well, to bring those guys into the sport, and that'll come in time. But actually, this last point of internal training and updating of systems, it might seem minor, especially to someone who's not a staff member, but actually it's been one of the biggest things, and it's been one of the biggest drives. There was a survey that came out by Activity Alliance a couple of years ago that looked at people's opinions who deliver or have experience of delivering to people with disabilities, and comparing that to people who have not delivered them. And with their permission, we replicated the same studies. And as I've already said, netball is not a traditionally disability-focused sport. And the attitudes and hang-ups that people had internally replicated exactly what was happened in other sports. And what that essentially was people were nervous, they were worried about things around injury, about language, all of the barriers that you might feel if you were going to be delivering to someone with a disability were replicated in staff internally. And so from the very first staff conference, I was able to start delivering internally to do some training. Our systems have updated. If any of you are individual members, you'll know that we're on the Engage system. And in the Engage system, we've been able to update the questions. So we don't just ask you now, do you have a disability? Yes, no. We ask you if you wear a hearing aid. We ask you if you've got any other kind of illnesses like arthritis, or it could be anything that you might have that limits your movement or the way that you get around your daily life. And this is actually the thing which has driven the numbers so far. But with all of these things in place, going back to the question that I asked Carly when I joined, what do you do, or how would you even know about all of this if you didn't play netball at school? And that is exactly why Blended Netball exists. Blended Netball is this last piece in the puzzle. It's, partly it's the last piece because it's the largest piece, you could say, but also we've taken the time to hopefully get it right. Like I say, we're going to keep developing it, but this isn't something we wanted to rush. We wanted to have those blocks, those foundations in place. So when we launched Blended, if someone loved it, when the end of Blended came, they had a club to go to in their region. They had a competition they could enter. Teachers have a course that they could go on to become educated in disability. If we had started with Blended Netball, we wouldn't have had all of those other things in place to then support it long term. And our vision really is long term. It is 10, 20, 30 years to be the number one team sport for disability in the country. So let's speak a little bit more about Blended in detail. It's worth saying now, we are in unusual times. With coronavirus, it's particularly difficult. And one of the questions I had was this the right time to launch Blended Netball whilst everyone's kind of still at home and we don't know exactly what September is going to bring? But it was National School Sports Week a couple of weeks ago, and it felt actually the absolute right time to launch it, because if we actually launch this in September when schools go back, you guys, teachers, you're going to be so overwhelmed with logistics. Again, I know from my wife and the stuff that she's having to read and prepare her classroom and things ready for September. We kind of would have got lost in the noise. And so we really wanted to talk about this now, so you guys can go and think about September as to what it might look like. Now, we don't anticipate you, first week back, delivering Blended Netball. But you might want to do it after October half term, or maybe, a couple of weeks into September when things have settled down a little bit. We know it's going to be a lot of unrest, especially for pupils returning, as well as for teachers too. So we don't have any guidelines as such around COVID and Blended, partly because they would be out of date pretty quickly because things are changing pretty quickly. Another reason is actually we as a governing body get our information from Department of Culture, Media and Sport, whereas schools get your information from Department of Education. Both government departments, both largely saying the same things, but speaking to two different groups of people. And so, again, we want to support and help. And we have county officers called Netball Development Officers in every single county around the country, and they will be there to help you if you do have any questions come the new school year. But let's move on. Let's talk about the who. So who do we need to do this? Well, we need a bunch of girls, of leaders that look a little bit like these girls, and not literally look like them, but you will probably recognize the kind of faces that are there, people who are enthused and motivated by netball. They're enthused and motivated in the school, in their other things that they do around the school. And this is where, I talked about teachers' input being light touch, but this is where it's so important that teachers' input is to kind of pick the group, the girls that are going to be delivering. Now, they don't need to be on leaders courses. They don't need to be on Duke of Edinburgh in order to be to deliver. If they are, then perfect. And we'll talk about how we can integrate Blended into some of those other leadership programs. But they really need to have an enthusiasm and a knowledge of netball in order to be able to deliver. Numbers wise, we've got 10 here, but actually that's 11. I think we've got 11 there, but actually that was down to because it was a multi-school pilot where we had 60 kids, 11 leaders. But largely speaking, a 1 to 3 kind of ratio is where we were thinking. But again, we don't dictate that. The reason being is you will know your SEN girls, and actually maybe someone needs more one-to-one attention. So you may need to have an extra person in there to help out. But largely speaking, you need a group of girls who are willing, enthusiastic, and know about netball to be able to deliver. They don't need to be on a leadership program. Who else do we need? Well, we need some SEN students. Yes, I've said already, this is a female-first program in the same way as netball is a female-first sport, but it's not a female-only sport. and Blended is not a female only program. So boys are included and are welcomed to join. In fact, the competitions even that I talked about, even the Para Netball Championships, is a mixed championships. I think even I'm right in saying it's the only national championships which is mixed sports, kind of run and organised by England Netball. And where men and women, boys and girls, play alongside each other on the same team. It's worth saying again, we want to be female first, and so there must be more girls on the court than boys when it comes to competition. That's one of the rules that we have, because we want to promote female sport, but it's not exclusive to females. Look, we know that the opportunities to sport for women compared to men, there is difference. Women have less opportunity to play sport, whether that's competitively or recreationally. And we know that disabled people have less access to sport. They have more barriers too. So disabled girls or disabled women have an even higher barrier to climb in order to be able to access sport. And that's why we are female first in Blended, not female only. Boys are welcome to Blended, but it's not exclusive to females, to girls. So that's who. When is the next question? Well, this is going to be available over the summer. The website will change and the resources will be there for you to download, ready to deliver from September 1st. If you want to, in that first week of the school term, you can absolutely start Blended and it'll be available. Blended Netball in its essence is going to be free. And you won't need to register every single player or everyone that's signed up. We're trying to keep this as simple and as easy for people to access. It will be free and available from September. And with the competition element, the Para Netball Championships, well, previous to the current situation, was scheduled for February. We will see where that ends up being, subject to change. But one of the things that we have found is that response that I started this video with, the 599 schools, means that we've got, in Lancashire, for example, we've got 30 schools that have signed up for Blended Netball. We've got 20 schools in North Yorkshire signed up. So across the country, we've got multiple schools in each county. And so we may be able to look at doing not just a national competition, we may be able to look at regional and county, but that's in the future. That's kind of where we're aiming to. And if we manage to achieve everything and get to that stage, that would be unbelievable. That would be the cherry on the top. So resources will be freely available to members and non-members from September, with a competition in the new calendar year at some point. So what do these resources look like? Well, these are the 6 resources: introduction, passing, defending, attacking, shooting, and the last one is a skills card and has a competition element, match play element in there too. The idea is, again, going back to that zero to hero attitude of taking someone from how do we catch a ball that's coming to us, bouncing up to us, that's a netball size, all the way through to how do I actually play a match, play a game. Like I say, 6 resources, but I wouldn't view this as 6 weeks of content. There's probably quite a bit more, and it just depends on, again, how you play Blended Netball or when you do the sessions. If you want this as part of a 20-minute lunchtime club, well, actually, you've potentially got enough content for a whole year. If you're doing this as an hour-long after-school club, then 45-minute after-school club, then you're probably going to take a term's worth of information there. There's probably 12 weeks worth of content. So what we're going to do is run through the passing resource, so you can kind of get a look and a feel as to what it's about. So passing. This is pretty much the layout of it. We've got 6 pages of content. I'll show you the next 2 pages in a second. But the idea really is there's no real explanation. There's not a leadership element around how to communicate and how to include. It's a case of, like I say, looking at the hard skills of netball and being able to deliver it. So a lot of the stuff on there should be instantly recognizable. we spent a lot of time in our pilots making sure that the games that we were doing in order to develop a skill were recognizable nationally. Now, the title might be slightly different. Like I said, we developed this in London through Team Up and the Wembley Stadium Trust. So if you're in the north of England and you don't call Catch Me If I Can, Catch Me If You Can, then hopefully, you know, you'll be able to figure out exactly what the title is to suit your region when it comes to your county. But hopefully, with the title, the description, or the diagram, you should be able to figure out exactly what it is, and it should be pretty familiar stuff. But we'll always start with a warm-up for everything, which will be a fun kind of game-based warm-up, and then we'll move on to the skill itself that we're trying to develop. We break that down into fundamentals. Yes, we could go incredibly technical on these things, but that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to bring people into the sport. And so we've broken down, in this case, chest pass, shoulder pass, and bounce pass into 3 or 4 fundamental points. But also there's a progression and a regression or a top tip in there as well for those that have picked it up more quickly. And then from there, we pretty much use game scenarios or fun scenarios in order to develop those passing. So Ladder of Glory, Catch Me If You Can, Clap Ball, and Line Ball. And you'll probably find that the last one, Line Ball, or the last couple are more interactive. There's more movement. It's less individual based and maybe based a little bit on timing. So maybe Line Ball, for example, if someone ahead of you has to run before you do in order to receive the ball. And then we'll end in a game of some sort, not necessarily a match play or competition, but at a game. And we'll see a lot of these games replicated in the skills cards, which come in, you know, Resource Pack 6. So what we're trying to get to is Resource Pack 6, and in this is the skills cards, which break down a lot of the stuff that they've been doing into personal and individual challenges. So this is very much around personal growth. So how many times can you hit a target on a wall in 1 minute? How many times can you score from a throwing ball, from throwing the ball at 5 different targets? It's very much around personal growth and personal records and personal achievement, rather than you're competing in a team or competing with your peer in order to develop. And what you're able to do then is everyone who completes the skill cards will get a certificate. You will be able to get a certificate as a SEN, as a player, but also the leaders too. They will get a certificate in leadership. And the way that you would get that is by contacting your county officer, your netball development officer, and all they will ask you in return, because as I said, this is a free program, including the certificates. All they will ask you in return is for your numbers. So we would just say, we don't need to know names, we just need to know numbers. To be able to say, oh, we had 10 SEN girls and 5 leaders involved in this. So we go, thank you very much, that's great. Obviously, we need to kind of keep track as to how many people are doing this, but also we need to report this as well and make sure that our funders are happy and that we're kind of going down the right road. So the only thing we ask in return is your numbers. And the last element of the resource pack is actually a competition, a game. This is an internal game in your school, and it doesn't have to be 7-a-side, it could be 5-a-side. It could be half court if you've got less numbers, but really what we want to do, if you do have less numbers, we would love you to include the leaders, the mainstream girls on the court as players. And so they really are finishing blended netball by playing a blended game of netball, where mainstream girls and SEN girls are on the same team at the same time and competing against each other at the same court at the same time. And that's pretty much where we want to end it. If we can get to that through these 6 resources, that would be incredible. And we know that the rate of improvement, especially through the pilots that we saw, this has just been staggering. And so whilst it might feel like a competitive game is a long way off in week 1, we know that it is absolutely achievable, and it's incredible the way that they progress. Again, I'm not really just talking about the SEN girls progressing. I'm really talking as well around those mainstream girls and all of those soft skills that they'll have developed. That, you know, when they started in week 1, maybe their communication wasn't great, but rather than teaching them and giving them a course as such, by the time you get to this element, the competition element, the skills cards, you will see organically how they have grown and developed. So I mentioned free to members and non-members, but it is worth saying that actually as a member school, you will get added benefits in there. So the resource pack and certificates will be free for everyone. So the fundamentals of Blended Netball is free. But actually what you'll get as a member is you'll get full NDO support. Remember, NDO is your county officer. So if you are particularly stuck on one thing in particular, or you're not sure how to do it, then your NDO will be able to spend some time to figure it out. Maybe get in touch with me to see if we can figure out a solution. If you're a non-member school, of course, they're still going to be there to answer any questions. But as you can imagine, they may not be able to spend, you know, an extended period of time supporting you with the program. Disability training, I mentioned the disability awareness course, but we are actually going to be doing an online kind of 90-minute webinar around disability awareness that will be, we're looking for it to be open both to leaders, or those mainstream girls, and teachers too, separately. So that'll be something that will be first open to members. It may well be open to non-members, but there might be a charge associated with it. The leadership training as well. We have a wonderful colleague, Imo, who leads all volunteering in England Netball, and leadership is covered as part of that. And she has got some wonderful young leaders, and so we're potentially looking at doing some webinars with some young leaders that have been through our programs as a little bit kind of inspirational talks, and to give guidance as well, a little bit on their top tips on how they've been leading through netball. Social networks, we're wanting to probably utilize Facebook private groups to bring schools in. We'll do that nationally, but potentially, depending on the numbers signing, we may even do that regionally. So as a member school, you will get to you'll get to see who is in your county. It might be even in your town. You might find that in your town there's a couple of schools that are also doing blended. That'd be great for you to reach out. You might even be able to do a festival yourselves as well, which would just be fantastic. So we're really trying to kind of emphasize that social network element as well. And competition too. I said free on there, but it'll certainly be at a reduced cost. Competition will be open to non-members, but there will be a cost associated with it. Again, this is very much to be confirmed. We don't have everything signed off at this stage, but I just kind of wanted to share with you what this looks like. Just for reference, I talk about schools being members. I think off the top of my head, to become a member, a school of England Netball, I think it's around £26 a year to be able to become a member. So it's not a significant cost. Obviously, all costs in school can feel significant, but really you also get access to the rest of England Netball benefits, the other school competitions, and the full range of England Netball. It's not a member of Blended Netball, it's a member of England Netball, so you get the full range of opportunities. So if that's something that interests you, or you're not sure if your school is or isn't, then actually your county officers will be in touch with you over the next week or so, and so feel free to reply to them and ask them about it. Finally, leadership awards. Where does this fit in? As as I've said, the resource very much talks about the hard skills of netball and not the soft skills of netball. That's partly because we know there is an awful lot of leadership programs that are out there that schools are doing and putting in some great time. We didn't want to just duplicate or potentially contradict even other programs out there. So Pass On Your Passion is England Netball's young leader program. So if you have pupils who are already involved in that, it's a 2-year program, then you can then they can use this time blended netball to add to their minutes to be able to gain the level. Same as Duke of Edinburgh. Duke of Edinburgh is normally broken into categories, but I think there's sport, leadership, community. I think they're 3 of the categories that it can be used for. And sports leaders, I'm less familiar with sports leaders, but from what I understand, if people are doing level 1, 2, and 3, this again should fit quite neatly into those qualifications that people may be doing. So that's why we don't give necessarily a resource specifically on leadership. We will be looking to support it. And like I say, it's really about that organic growth through those, developing those natural skills. And that's maybe where, to go back to your roles as teachers and that light touch, it's just that guidance. It's that be able to support them. We don't envisage teachers going and delivering any of the content. The resources aren't written for teachers. Like I say, they're written for 14, 15-year-old girls. However, it's open to teachers to do that if you wanted to. If you're a club watching this and you're thinking, this sounds really great, how can I be involved? Then this is, again, open to clubs. It's aimed at schools, but it's open to clubs. And maybe you've got a junior section that you feel that this could be a really great asset to help bring them on in their leadership. And you might even see some on-court benefits if you are helping developing their communication skills and the like. So leadership awards, it's absolutely compatible with and is not competing with other leadership awards that are out there. And that's pretty much Blended Netball, something we are incredibly excited about. I feel like there's a real opportunity for growth, that other sports aren't doing this either. And ultimately, as a peer-to-peer led light touch program, it's not one of those one more things that teachers often get. Like I say, my wife often will get asked as a teacher, if you just do one more thing, it'll mean that X, Y, and Z can happen. And what I really don't want to do is say to teachers, just one more thing, and this thing's netball. Can you just do this? This really is designed to be an kind of that light touch approach that sees massive benefits for you and your students, rather than, oh, one more thing that I've got to do. This hopefully is not going to be a burden to you, but will hopefully bring a lot of things to your school, a lot of benefits to your school. So that's Blended Netball. Thank you very much for joining me. I hope it's going to be a good school term coming ahead with all of the chopping and changes, but we'll leave it there for today. Thank you.